Let's review one of the most famous fights from the movie Gladiator. Hi Vix, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. I'm an antique arms dealer, but I also teach people how to sword fight and occasionally get involved in TV and film. And today we're going to do a movie fight review. This is part of my playlist of movie fight reviews. Check out those if you haven't done already. I've got a lot more on the channel, and we're going to be looking at probably the most famous fight from one of the most famous movies, certainly of the kind of late 90s, around 2000, and that is the movie Gladiator, and this is the fight between Maximus and the Tigris of Gaul. Now, before we jump into this movie fight review, I want to quickly say that, first of all, I really like the movie Gladiator. It's got a great soundtrack, it's got great acting, it's a great story. Historically, well, you can look at people like history buffs if you want to find out what absolute historical mess it is. So there are a lot of problems with the historical context of it, the background, just everything. Even the arms and armour. And one of the things that bugs me the most in hindsight about the movie, and I did really enjoy it for the first few years after it came out in 2000, but one of the things that bugs me the most is it doesn't really show gladiators. So the movie is called Gladiator, and it's supposed to be about gladiators, and a lot of it's set in the Colosseum in Rome. But the fact is that you don't really get to see the most famous types of gladiator that were actually in use at the time. The Myrmilones, the Rotarius, the Secutor, the Provocator, the Hoplomachus, all of these famous types of gladiator. And really they define gladiatorial combats and were often put in specific pairs that kind of told the story, and they each had different strengths and weaknesses. And we don't see any of this in the movie, which makes me sad. Even the movie Spartacus made an attempt at this, and we had a Thracian and a Retiarius. We had some of the famous types of gladiator represented in that movie. So in a sense, Spartacus is a more historical representation of gladiators. It even shows the sort of gladiator training school fairly well, rather than Gladiator. That being said, what we're going to see here is essentially a fantasy in the Roman milieu fight between two types of gladiator that never really existed. Maximus with a sword and shield, and his opponent, the Tigris of Gaul, who is using a sword and axe. More about that in a second. Also a brief comment on armour, or the lack thereof. In actual gladiatorial combats, almost all of the types of gladiator wore large helmets, designed to basically mean that they couldn't get one hit in the head and be fight over, because they wanted the fights to go on for a certain amount of time, if possible. So most types of gladiator used forms of large shield and a helmet, which means that they're actually quite good defensively. So despite the fact they don't have much other body armour, if any in some cases, they are quite good in defence. The exception is the Retiarius, who doesn't wear a helmet, generally speaking. In this particular fight, we have one person who is wearing a helmet, a little bit similar, I suppose, to a Thracian helmet or a Myrmilones helmet. And then we've got Russel Crowe with no helmet at all, but a shield. So, again, it's not representative of real gladiatorial combat, but it does make for a fun fight in a movie. So without further ado, let's get into this fight. I'm going to try and be as concise as possible because this is a long fight by movie standards. So let's get into it.
Alias Maximus!
So just to comment on his armour, essentially he wears throughout most of the movie this form of leather cuirass with one sort of pauldron, we could call it, so shoulder defence. This is fantasy, it's not based on anything particularly, it's a little bit similar to what we call a muscle cuirass. In reality, even if it was thick leather, it would only really protect against cuts, not really much against thrust. So essentially he's almost unarmoured. Oh, right, okay. So, jamming a blade into the ground is never the best idea, assuming that you have sharpened it and it is ready for combat, okay? The sharpness of a sword is really its most important quality, and that includes the sharpness of the tip and the sharpness of the edges. Imagine that you have a razor blade that you're going to shave with in the morning, and you decide before you shave, let's just jam it in the garden lawn a couple of times before we then go to shave. bad idea. Not even talking about tetanus, that's not a problem in this case, but sandy soil is like sandpaper, surprise, surprise, little stones, and it's very, very bad for the edge or point of a sword.
We who are about to die, salute you!
So that is the legendary Sven Thorson, who is obviously a friend of Arnie, and you may remember him from Conan the Barbarian. He was the guy with the big hammer. Absolute legend, and really, really great to see him in this movie. So Sven, aka the Tigris of Gaul, he is wearing an interesting assemblage. Essentially, he's got these large metal pauldrons. I don't really know of any gladiatorial historical equivalent for those, but he is supposed to be essentially a kind of end-of-level boss or hero, whatever way you want to look at him. And this type of helmet, again, is complete fantasy. However, a funny little twist, this helmet is actually inspired by, I believe, a 15th century, late 15th century Italian sallet, which actually has a lion head. It's a famous piece of armour, maybe we could look at that in a future video, but the addition of this faceplate, so what they've done is they've taken a all'antica Renaissance Italian helmet and they've added a Roman cavalry faceplate into the middle of it. And so it's a complete and utter fantasy, but anyway, it looks kind of cool for the movie. And one other little detail, you can actually see there, he is actually wearing some scale armour around his thighs, and he also has greaves. Now, it is worth pointing out that Russel Crowe, Maximus, does not have any leg armour. He has boots, but that wouldn't really protect from a cut or a thrust. Certainly not from an axe, and not really from a sword either. So essentially, he's not armoured on the legs. Now, interestingly, a lot of gladiators, in fact most of them, did wear leg armour on the leg on the side where there was a shield. So if you were holding a shield with your left hand, you usually have leg armour on your left leg, because that's the leg that you normally lead with when you're holding a large shield. So one little detail, if we just go back here for a second, if you look at the position that Russel Crowe is standing in, or Maximus is standing in, with his shield and his sword up like this isn't really necessarily a guard position as we'd normally like fence in or fight from, but there's nothing wrong with it. I guess it's kind of like a medium guard. And having the shield forward is the most important thing. One of the cardinal sins of movie fights is when someone strikes with the sword and puts the shield behind themselves. Now, funnily enough, there are actually techniques, historical techniques, where you do this for specific reasons, but generally speaking, you want to keep the shield out in front of you because the shield's there to protect you, but it's also your measure. Your left foot forward, your left hand forward, and that is your way at measuring your distance from your opponent. So it's good that he's got the sword and the shield in front of him at least. Right, okay, so nice detail there. Obviously we know the chains are going to release the tigers. I'm assuming I'm not spoiling anyone here because I think anybody watching this video will have seen this movie before. But the kick in the face with the sand is a really, really nice detail, and it does relate to things we actually find in history. Obviously, kicking dirt in someone's face is something that goes back to prehistoric times, I'm sure. But we even find references to pocket sand, and this has become a meme on the internet in some quarters, where there's a guy called Donald MacBain. He's an 18th century Scottish pimp and duelist, and he talks about pocket sand and throwing sand in the opponent's face. Why not? You know, and we find similar things in Japanese martial arts as well. So kicking sand in someone's face, perfectly valid, and then he immediately follows up, boom, 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 with a flurry of attacks. Now, about that flurry of attacks, there's nothing really for me to say about them. There's nothing fancy or complex. They're pretty much all downward blows, alternating between left and right with axe and sword. Maximus, for his part, mostly defends with the shield, perfectly fine. One detail. So, Sven, aka the Tigris of Gaul, holds a sword in his right hand and an axe in his left. Now, that's fine, you can do that, My observation, however, is that if assuming you're right-handed, you're actually probably better off putting the axe in your right hand and the sword in your left. The reason for that is the sword is a more nimble and easily handleable, wieldable weapon than an axe. So you're better off using the heavier, top-heavy weapon, the less wieldable, less nimble weapon, in your stronger arm. And I happen to know that Sven is right-handed because we know that from Conan and a bunch of other movies. So I personally would have had him with the axe in the right hand and the sword in the left. There's another reason as well, because you tend to, if you're using two weapons, if you're right hand dominant, you tend to attack more with the right hand and defend more with the left hand. Now, in defense, the axe is crap. Okay, the axe is really good in offense. It's not very good in defense, essentially because it's top heavy. Okay, so if something's very top heavy, it's not great at parrying. Okay, something like a sword, which is balanced more towards the hand, is actually better for parrying, and you can stab with it. You don't always need to cut with it. So both for defensive and offensive reasons, I personally would have put the axe in the right hand. But there we go, different people are different, and I do know some people who use their weapons this way around. Right, okay, I'm going to stop there. We're just about to get into some tiger action. One detail is that Sven, or Tigris of Gaul, is attacking a lot at the shield. Now, you could argue, okay, that's because Maximus is blocking with the shield. But when you're fighting with shields, one of the most dominant things on your mind is getting around the shield. Just hitting the shield is never going to achieve anything. You could argue with an axe, you might be wanting to hook the shield, and he does do that at various points. But by and large, here, he's just hit into the shield. What in a real fight, and I know this is a movie fight and I know they're gladiators and all this kind of stuff, but in a real fight, just so you know, you should usually be aiming to attack around or behind or under or over the shield. So what we should be seeing is actually, I'll put the sword down for a second, is maybe one blow coming in to occupy the shield and then another blow coming in low to wrap, cut around Maximus's thigh, for example, or coming in with a blow with the sword, well, right hand in this case, sword to bring the shield up, then coming in with the axe to try and hook the shield, and then coming in with a thrust with the sword behind. So what we should see is a little bit more logical progression of how to get past and how to get round that shield, rather than just bang, 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 bang. But nevertheless, it looks fun, and now the tigers are going to get involved. So let's unleash those tigers. Right, okay, we're going to stop there. I'm only going to go on a minor diversion talking about tigers, okay? So first of all, it's relatively unlikely that you would get tigers in the Roman arena, but not impossible. So they could have indeed imported tigers from India or another area which had tigers at this time. They more often had lions. Okay, so lions were more normal to see in the arena. Now, a detail on big cats is we know from written records that they and other people that used big cats in these sorts of amusements often had a lot of problems getting the big cats to fight or attack. Because if you take a cat and you put it in a strange environment, they're not very keen on just randomly attacking people. But there was a specific form of gladiator whose job it was to fight against animals. So this is a fantasy element, but it's not completely outlandish. I think it's more outlandish that there are two tigers and they just instantly attack. I'm not sure that many tigers would actually do that in reality. In terms of armaments against a tiger, a shield and a sword, pretty good idea. Anyway, let's see how the fight goes on. Right, okay, a little detail there, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you that one again. So, tiger comes up, then attack with the sword, smack. Okay, good. I absolutely love that the shield is being used offensively. Not only do we know that all shield systems in history have done this, but we specifically know that the Romans did this. It's even shown in art, and absolutely striking with the edge is a fantastic thing to do. Now, often in movie fights, we see them strike with the front or flat of the shield. Now, I'm not going to say this is wrong or was never done. I'm sure it was, and it is sometimes done. But striking with the edge is much better for two reasons. One, the edge is going to do a lot more damage because it's focusing all that energy into a smaller area. And two, it reaches further. Okay, so if you're holding a Roman scutum, this is a round shield. The closest thing, incidentally, to this is the shield of the Hoplomachus. So I haven't really criticised this shield, although it's not a typical Roman shield, and it's certainly not a typical gladiator shield. In other words, a small form of scutum. This is not dissimilar to the type of shield carried by Hoplomachus. So what you could say here is you could argue that Maximus is a Hoplomachus without the helmet and without the spear. The Hoplomachus, incidentally, was a form of Roman gladiator who was based on the Greek hoplite. And the Greek hoplites used a round metallic shield, which is what Maximus is using here. So I won't be critical of the shield. But striking with the edge to the helmet, brilliant. It's a good thing to put in choreography. It's realistic. It's well represented. And even though Tigris of Gaul is wearing a helmet, it kind of doesn't, it's a very powerful blunt force blow, okay? Striking with a shield, it's a momentum, it's a big piece of mass. It might not be moving incredibly fast, but it's a big piece of mass. So getting struck in the face with the edge of a shield, even when you've got a helmet on, and you can see people doing this in Bohurt fighting all the time, is really, really effective. So really good. Right, let's get on with the fight. Good, and I like the fact that, you know, he went bam, bam, he followed up. The only thing I would say is if Maximus had really wanted to kill Sven there, what he should have done is he should have smacked with the shield and then probably stabbed him in the chest where he doesn't have any armour with the sword, okay? That would have been a perfect game finisher. So at that moment, Maximus could have finished the fight. Smash in the face with the edge of the shield, thrust into the chest with the sword. Fight over. Anyway, it's a movie fight, so we're having fun. Let's carry on. Right, so we got some panned wide sort of action there. Let's just go back and look at that again. Bam, bam, bam. Right, so he's very much, okay, they are both taking turns. So this is fairly standard choreography. He is going boom, 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 boom. Now, not to say you don't do that with two-handed weapons. It does work out like that sometimes. But there's no particular logic to the way that those attacks are being strung together. He's literally going hit, 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 hit. Usually if you're using rapier and dagger or two swords, or in this case sword and axe, you think about, okay, I'm going to do one thing with an axe so that they defend that to create an opening for the follow-up thing with the sword. So even if you're not attacking with both at the same time, which in fairness you often don't, you often do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, often, and this is the same in Filipino martial arts, often the one attack will be in order to make the opponent defend one area to expose and open another area for the follow-up attack. But Maximus, for his part as well, is tending to alternate between the sword and the shield. And in reality, he could do two at the same time. So this is the difference between two time and single time. And in single time, he could defend one of these attacks at the same time as putting in his own attack, because that's one of the wonderful things about sword and shield, or anything else in a shield, is the shield is so good defensively. It covers such a big area that enables you to cover one whole line while attacking in another line, without exposing the sword arm as well, because the sword arm is behind the cover of the shield. Anyway, let's carry on with the fight. Right, okay, nice detail there. I like the fact that Sven was holding up his, let's go back and see that again. Holding up his, there it goes, right. So this axe being held up there, that is absolutely something that we do in martial arts, that we do in fencing, is that if you can see, if you've got two objects, and if you can see that a person is coming with a downright blow, as we call it, a downwards blow, or fendente, then absolutely covering that line while doing something else, which is what he's sort of seeming to do here. And I like the fact that you could say he's anticipating the incoming attack. What Maximus should do is, seeing that weapon's up there, he should redirect and maybe come underneath it and stab or cut somewhere else or whatever. However, the reality is that once someone's already started moving, you can put the parry in a little bit early. And especially if you've got two weapons, this enables you to do something else. So I kind of like it. I kind of like that you can see what's going on. I also like being able to see some details of the axe. On that axe, did the Romans have anything like this? Not really, no. So the closest type of axe to this axe that's actually shown here is actually a type of much later Persian axe, Indo-Persian axe. It doesn't really look like anything we see in the Roman world. However, I don't have a big problem with it for two reasons. Number one, they had axes, okay, and if you look on certain Roman art where we see assemblages of captured enemy weapons, we sometimes see axes that you could argue are vaguely kind of like this, not that dissimilar. So what I would say is we could say that this is a foreign exotic weapon or a gladiatorial weapon made to look like a foreign exotic weapon. So I'm not going to be overly critical because we know, for example, that the Thracian's Sika, which is a type of curved or angled sword, doesn't really look like the actual Thracian Sika. It's a gladiatorial version of it, like a fantasy version for gladiatorial games. So that's what I say this axe is. Anyway, let's carry on with the fight. Good. A kick. Brilliant. You've got 4 limbs. Well, you've got 5 limbs if you count the head. You've got headbutts as well. And absolutely, I love the fact that they strung together defences and they put a kick in. Some people want to go, oh, you wouldn't kick like that when we're using swords and axes. Wrong. You do. So long as the opponent's sword or weapon is occupied, if you've parried, in that moment, you can punch, you can kick, knee, these sorts of things. And we do often find this in the treatises. So in fact, you know, I teach from Fiori de Liberi, and in Fiori there's a couple of kicks, in fact, so long as the opponent's sword is taken care of. You don't just go up to someone who's holding a sword and kick them, because they'll just hit you in the leg with the sword. But if they've swung at you, you've parried the blow, then you kick them, they go stumbling back, and you hit them in that time. So it's brilliant. Yeah, really good. Good, nice roll. That could get easily overlooked, but that was a nice roll and recovery. Learning to roll and get back up on your feet. You don't want to be on the ground, especially because there's another tiger. So here comes the tiger, who instantly goes to attack. It doesn't think, where's my dinner, or what are all these people doing around making all this loud noise? No, it thinks, oh, a human, I'm going to instantly kill a human, and has a big order. Right, a detail about these big swings. Now, by pure coincidence, at training the other day, I saw a sword break on a buckler. And this is not uncommon. You take any type of sword and you smash it into another hard object, especially with a sharp edge, because sharp edges take nicks and chips. And as soon as you've got a nick or a chip in the edge, it has a stress riser and the blade is more likely to break, shatter, whatever. Smashing your weapon, particularly the sword, it doesn't matter so much with the axe, but particularly with a sword, smashing it into a metal shield is a bad idea. And I would say to Tigris, I'd say, look, you're an awesome fighter, Sven, you're an impressive guy, I loved you in Conan the Barbarian. However, stop smashing your sword into that shield. Go for the person instead of their shield. So they're really in this fight using the shield as a target and really hammering on it because it looks impressive to most people. Just so that you know and so that you're educated from this, if there's a shield in front of you, don't just smash into the shield without some kind of plan. Try and go around the shield. Try and hit the person behind the shield, above, below, around the sides. So trying to get around the shield is the important thing. And moreover, if you're using, this isn't a gladius, but if you're using a gladius, they're not the most robust swords in the world. They've got fairly thin tangs and, you know, they've got iron, let's say some of them have steel blades. Smashing it into a metallic shield is going to massively increase your chances of breaking your sword. And in this type of fight, if you break your sword, you are screwed. Right, let's carry on with the fight. Right, okay, nice little detail there. So Maximus swung his sword in, Tigris parries it with the axe. One thing we've noticed that's really nice is because an axe has this kind of beard, as we call it, or hook, if you do block with it, you can get a grip and a hook on the opponent's sword, and you can even pull it out of their hands. So parrying with the axe, although I personally would rather have the sword in the parrying hand and the axe in the predominant hitting hand, parrying with the axe does have some potential benefits, and I like the fact that they showed that. Good. There was a little bit there we could see him kind of hooking with the axe, and that was clearly intentional, and I really liked that. Right, so he's got some really good movements. I like the fact that Sven is doing these sorts of movements, and this is something we see a lot with two-handed sword, is that when you, or any two weapon in each hand, paired swords, not two-handed, when you swing through with one, it will naturally come down here or over here. So both arms shouldn't really end up here. Now, famously, of course, Maximus does do this at one point. I won't spoil it here. We'll look at that maybe in another video. But generally speaking, if one hand is swinging from high to low, the other hand wants to go high at this point. So I really like the fact that they've got this type of motion because that is correct, because you've got to keep the two weapons out of each other's way. And most people, if you just pick up two sticks or anything in your house and start trying to swing them around, the first thing that will happen is they'll hit each other. So you'll kind of block yourself from fighting the opponent. So you really need to get systems of movement which actually work by getting the two things moving around each other so they don't conflict with each other. And they show this really, really nicely here. So we talked about this in a previous video. These fights, you can't always see what's happening, okay? So the way it's edited is chop, 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 you know, cut, 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 with lots of close in stuff. Now, I'm not going to be critical of that because I actually think it adds to the feeling of a real fight. Because when you're in a fight, whether you're in a sporting fight, you know, competitive fight, or whether you're in a real fight, everything is quite chaotic, okay? And it is quite chop, chop, chop like this. You don't see a fight as if you're playing in third-person player, okay? However, if we look at old movies, we tend to view it as an audience, and you can see more of what's going on, so it's actually easier for me to critique. In this case, we can only really see the vague details of what's going on, so that's why I'm not critiquing everything that's going on, but it looks convincing and it makes it look like a fight. Right, so a little detail on that. I'm not a zoologist, however, there are lots of people who've been killed by a tiger really quite quickly like this. If you have a tiger on your back, they've got fairly long teeth. As I understand it, they tend to bite to the back of the head or the back of the neck. That's how they kill a lot of their prey. And I suspect that Maximus would have been done for at this point. But, you know, maybe we could say the tiger didn't quite get a good enough grip, and some people do survive tiger attacks, so anyway. But tigers are also big, really heavy animals, so I'm not sure that he would have stayed on his feet there, but there we go. Right, okay, let's go back there. There was a hook. So let's see here. Good. Okay, so I love that. That's something I've been talking about, using the axe to hook around the edge of Maximus's shield. Now, you might be wondering, which is better if you've got two people who are the same, if it's you versus you, if one you has an axe and sword and the other you has a sword and shield, which one has an advantage? My opinion, sword and shield every time. Okay, the sword and shield has the advantage. However, one advantage that the axe has is the ability to hook. You can hook the opponent's weapon, you can hook their shield, and you can hook their body. That means you could hook behind their leg and pull them over, behind their neck and pull them forwards, behind their shield, pull it open and then stab into the... So as a hooking device, axes are really useful. And anyone who spars with medieval or ancient world weapons, as soon as anyone picks an axe up, one of the first things you find them doing, just absolutely naturally, is starting to hook with it. So I'm really glad they included that in here. Right, so two things happened there in quick succession. First of all, Maximus lost his shield because it got hooked off him. Secondly, Maximus then hooked the sword off Tigris. Now, that's actually quite realistic, because one of the problems with hooking things, and it's the same thing with grabbing someone or grappling someone, at the moment that you do that to them, they are also connected to you. So when I hook your shield with my axe, in a sense, your shield is now hooking my axe as well. So remember that these things go in two directions. So I like the fact that he managed to get the axe, but also from a narrative point of view, it's a good idea, because there was a huge advantage, because Tigris now had two weapons and Maximus only had one. So by having one lose their shield and then one lose their axe, it kind of keeps it as a level fight. Right, little detail there. Did you spot it? Let's go back. Put the shield away, put the axe away. Right, Maximus changes hand. Now, funnily enough, they don't really make much of it. In fact, they don't make anything of this in the fight. And I only when I came to do this review I'd never noticed he did that before. Why? I suspect, I might be wrong, but I suspect that there was a bit of choreography which they cut out, or even a bit of film that they filmed which they removed. Why would you do that? So if his dominant hand is his right hand, why would you switch to the left? Well, left-handed people have an advantage. Not for any biological reason, purely because most people in the world, in historical periods or now, are right-handed. Therefore, right-handed people are most used to fighting right-handed people. So when right-handed people fight left-handed people, they have an inherent disadvantage. However, left-handed people are most used to fighting right-handed people. Now we can see here that Tigris, or Sven, behind the mask, is right-handed. We knew that anyway from watching Conan. But if you are forced to fight someone who's very good with their right hand, and I've done it myself, switching to your left hand, if you can use your left hand adequately, might give you an advantage. And being able to switch in the fight, Princess Bride, does anyone want me to review that? Get commenting down below. Switching within the fight can really mess with an opponent as well, because you have to kind of retune your brain to which of the exposed sides, which sides certain angles of attack come in from. So anyway, I really like that. It seems like a really small thing, but I really liked it as a detail. Unfortunately for Maximus, he immediately gets a tiger. However, luckily, he manages to steal the tiger on the way down with his left hand. Now, credit where credit's due, it was amazing they got the continuity there. So they managed to get Russel Crowe, or Maximus, to switch to the left hand, and then in that whole scene, he is stabbing with the left hand, which is really good. A lot of other movies would have forgotten that detail and had him stabbing with the right hand, which he wouldn't have been able to do because the sword would have been trapped on the other side of the tiger's body. That is very much not a dying tiger, and I always thought that bit was a bit poorly done. Right, okay, so a lot of things happen there. Let's go back a little bit for a second. You only barely see it. Right, so Maximus has picked up the axe from the ground and parried with the top of it. So I don't have an axe here, unfortunately. But at the top, you've essentially got like an L or a T junction. Now, parrying with that part of the axe is literally something we find in the medieval and Renaissance fighting treatises, specifically for poleaxe. So if someone swings a poleaxe at you, and you can do it with halberd as well, you parry with the top crossbar, which forms the axe. So I really, really like that they showed that. Let's go down and see that again. Bam. There we go. I can't seem to quite freeze frame it. There we go. There we go. He manages to catch it right at the top there. So I really like that detail. Now, what Tigris is doing at this point is silly. Silly and illogical. So he's just going like this. Okay. When your opponent's on the ground, they are further away and harder to reach, but they are at a massive disadvantage. He has got a sword, What he should really be doing is thrusting, because you've got the longest reach with the thrust. But, you know, I guess you could argue that his blood is up and his adrenaline's flowing and he's not thinking clearly, but he is supposed to be a champion fighter. But anyway, the other thing you can do if someone's on the ground at this point is start stamping on them. But more importantly, because Maximus is holding weapons, try and stamp on one of the weapons. Anyway, let's see what he actually does. Right, another block with the axe. I really like the fact that they've shown that again. It's a really effective thing to do, and they're catching it in exactly the right point. You could catch it on this spike, but it'd be more likely to slide off. So I really like that he's catching it in this sort of crop. Good! And then he does exactly what I advised. So rather than that initial frantic swinging, he should have done this from the outset. Stamp on one of the weapons. Or if you can't stamp on the weapon, stamp on the person's arm or hand, because that would prevent them, or at least impede them, from using the weapon. So again, we got the shield being used. There's a lot of confusing things going on here. And again, this is a good illustration of the fact that this form of editing, is that possible? He's using a sword, then an axe, then a shield, then a... What? Anyway, he is switching weapons. Isn't it very, very lucky that all of these weapons are within reach of his arms, given that he's not moving around on the ground? But anyway, the glories of editing. And then this famous end thing, smack, spike straight into his foot. And of course, with sandals of the time, very little protection. And yeah, I quite like that. I think that's pretty effective. So, interesting, I've always wondered, why is Tigris bleeding from his mouth at this point? Because I wonder again, was there something which was edited out here? Because the implication is that he's got internal bleeding, and he's bleeding from his lungs, I don't know, out of his mouth. But we haven't seen him be stabbed in the body. We've seen him be skewered through the foot. Now, it's been a long time since I studied biology, but last time I checked, a stab in the foot doesn't make you bleed out of the mouth. So I don't know. Get commenting in the comments down below. Why is he bleeding out of his mouth? Is it just because he was smacked in the front of the helmet with the shield? But then that was ages ago in the fight. Anyway, here we go. This is just basically the crowd baying for blood. And there we go, and that's the symbolic flying open of the visor there. And you know, I'm going to pretty much end. There we go. Going to end the fight there. He doesn't. He gives him mercy and gets in lots of trouble with this. It's flipping the bird to the emperor. But you know, this is an awesome fight, and I'm sure that there are millions of people all over the world who watched this and loved this. I'm not here to be overly critical of it. I really enjoy it, and I really enjoy this movie for all of its flaws and all of its faults. And, you know, I think they did a great job with this fight in terms of entertaining the audience. But my job is to be critical. So hopefully, and add some context and add some explanation. So hopefully what I've done here is giving you, maybe pointed out some things you never noticed in this fight before. Comment down below. Had you ever noticed that he switches to left hand for no apparent reason? Had you noticed all of these things in this fight that I've mentioned before? Are there things that you noticed which I didn't mention and you're like, Matt, why didn't you mention this? Because maybe I've missed something. Anyway, maybe you know some other things about the choreography. Maybe you know if there's a director's cut or a fuller version of this fight, because I strongly believe, looking at this again in its minutiae, that there are bits of this fight that were filmed and probably edited out. I might be wrong, but I think I'm right. Anyway, no tigers were harmed during the filming of this video, or indeed mine. Thank you very much for watching my channel. I have been Matt Easton, I will continue to be, and if you like this kind of stuff and general talk about historical warfare and weaponry and armour and things like that, you really should consider being subscribed if you're not already, so click that button please. And give us a like if you've enjoyed this, share the video around, and hopefully I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers folks! Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers folks!